Hello, and welcome back. We damage we. The lights are getting fucking crazy. I hope you guys are ready for this. We're here in front of Grandma's hands once again. Whoa, these are maybe a little too crazy. I thought that this was gonna do something else, and it's like not doing what I thought it was gonna do. I thought it was just supposed to do that. We are here. We recently were here to talk about a classic of 1980s literature, Paul Auster's The New York Trilogy. Is that upside down? Yeah, it is. Paul Auster's The New York Trilogy. Now we're here to talk about another classic of 1980s literature, William Gibson's Neuromancer. I've even got, this is an old ass mass market of this bad boy. I bought this paperback copy of Neuromancer in probably like 2007, and I've been dragging this fucking thing around to 9 different houses and from Minnesota to New York and back, and everything else everywhere I've ever lived as an adult, every home I've ever lived in, because I bought this when I was still a child. I have had this fucking book in the house, and I will continue to, because I'm not getting rid of it, because holy fuck, you guys, this book is good. Surprising no one with this opinion, right? Like, one of the most heralded pieces of science fiction ever. I'm pretty sure it's on, like, the Time magazine 100 greatest English language novels thing, you know, etc., 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 etc. The cornerstone, the text of cyberpunk. This is the Bible of cyberpunk, basically. This and Blade Runner. Published in 1984, it was Gibson's first novel. Came off of the heels of some very buzzworthy short fictions that take place in the same universe as this, and then it was the first part of a trilogy. Launched Gibson's career, launched cyberpunk into the collective conscious. It was the first book to ever win, you can see right here, the Hugo, the Nebula, and the Philip K. Dick Award all in the same year. Like, there's been a couple books. It's a little overstated. The Philip K. Dick Award is for original paperbacks, books that are published in paperback. I would say that it is less prestigious than the Hugo or the Nebula. It is also newer. It was pretty new at the time that this book came out, because there are other things that have won the Hugo and the Nebula, like Dune. Dune won the Hugo and the Nebula. But still, like, if you win the Hugo and the Nebula, it's pretty serious. It's like, you know, it's like winning the Pulitzer and the National Book Award, like, which I don't know if anybody's ever done that. So yeah, this book has a huge reputation. And when I was a little boy, so wee little lad, and I loved science fiction, and I would buy books at the, Goodwill and stuff. And so when I was probably like 11 or 12 years old, I wound up with a copy of Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, and which is another sort of like tentpole classic of cyberpunk. And I read that book and fell deeply in love with it. And it remained one of my favorite books throughout my adolescence. It was a book that I would always, when people would ask me for book recommendations, that was always like the first one I would give, because it's a book that's like really fun and easy to read, and like you can burn through it in a weekend and just have a really good time. And, you know, because I loved it so much, I knew about this book, and I knew that this book was, you know, sort of the progenitor or whatever. And I've had this copy of this for forever, and I've tried to start it God fucking knows how many times. And I could never quite get my fingers into it. I would always read like 5 pages of it and just be like, and read something else instead. But then, if you watched my talk about Paul Auster's New York trilogy, I was talking about how I've been reading things mysteries, detective stories, things of that nature, for sort of inspiration for the story that I'm working on. And I was sort of just like doing research about like what are things that are kind of similar to some of the things that I'm writing and working on. And one of the things that came up was pattern recognition by William Gibson, which I read last year. I did a video about it. It's on my channel. You can watch that if you're interested as well. And that was the first William Gibson that I ever read, was pattern recognition. So I was a bit of an iconoclast. I started in an unusual place. Most people start with Neuromancer, but I wound up reading pattern recognition first, and I loved pattern recognition. I thought it was fantastic. It was exactly what I was looking for at the time, and it made me be like, wow, I really got to read Neuromancer now. And I did. It took me 6 months to get to it or whatever, but you know, I've now read Neuromancer. I read it over the course of the last month or so, and I've got some thoughts. So the first thing I will say is probably the most obvious, which is like reading this is like reading any classic where you just are constantly bombarded with realizations of how stolen from this book is. Every inch along the road, there are things where you're like, oh yeah, wow, yeah. Here's The Matrix. Here's Cyberpunk 2077. Here's, you know, Johnny Mnemonic, which is not really a ripoff. It's William Gibson wrote that, and like Strange Days and Snatcher, the Hideo Kojima game, and just you know, endless cyberpunk things that you can compare this to. That this was, besides like Blade Runner kind of really cemented the visual aesthetic and a lot of the tropes, but I think most of the rest of it got filled in here. And then the more sort of satirical side of it, I feel like got sort of introduced by like RoboCop, Paul Verhoeven's science fiction, and then literarily was sort of canonized by Snow Crash. This book is like much more serious, I would say, tonally than Snow Crash. It's a lot darker. There's not really that much humor in this book. It's, though I will say, like Snow Crash, it is very fast-paced, very intense. It's astonishing to me in retrospect that it was hard for me to get into this book because this book is so fast-paced. And it's short, like 270 pages, really breezed by. And short chapters, 10-page chapters. I burned through it in like 3 weeks, including, as we'll get into, a somewhat prolonged, like week-long break. So the story of Neuromancer, let's just cover our bases really quick. Neuromancer is, the main character of Neuromancer is a young man named Case. He's a 20-something hacker, net runner, as they call them, who on his last job got poisoned by his employer, who he tried to steal from. They fried his neural receptors. He's no longer able to jack into the Matrix, the VR, that you know, exists within this world. This is a world that is in the near future where you know, generally like governments have been superseded by corporations. Most of the eastern seaboard of the United States, from like New York to Atlanta, has become one continuous metropolis that's referred to as the Sprawl. This is the first book in the Sprawl trilogy. Japanese tech, you know, companies are, you know, very prestigious, but then there's other just tech companies in general. They're these sort of monarchistic dynasties that include these cryogenically frozen and cloned, you know, Jeff Bezos types who like run entire countries, and then it's very cool. The world of this book is just so cool, and like not in like always a good way. Um, it's not cute, or maybe it is cute, but it's not like it's a dystopia, obviously. But just like it's such a fascinating world that the book is contained within. And so Case, he's functionally suicidal, addicted to speed. He came to Night City, which is like Chiba, Tokyo, and to try and get surgeons to fix his brain, but none of them can. And so he's basically trying to go on the last bender before a mysterious femme fatale with razor blades in her fingers shows up to recruit him for some sort of mysterious job by some sort of mysterious guy who's working for some sort of other mysterious unknown entity for unknown reasons, and the gambit being that they're going to fix his brain and then he's going to help them do this job, this series of jobs. I'm not going to get too into the plot because I think that like I'll explain. This sounds reductive. I don't mean it to be. Most of this book is plot. There's not like what you're here for is the plot and the world of the plot moves through. The Gibson's language is fantastic. His sentence quality, is very high, and that is something that I struggle with a lot of genre writers, especially people who write series. Their books are bloated, their sentences are weak, their dialogue is fucking atrocious. People who I love dearly and earnestly will have and will look me in the eyes and tell me that Patrick Rothfuss is a fantastic writer at a sentence level. Which is insane to me to think that Patrick Rothfuss has fun characters and good plots. Patrick Rothfuss is not a good writer, and Patrick Rothfuss is terrible at writing dialogue. It's a tangent, doesn't matter. One thing that I thought was really interesting about this book is that I feel like most of the point, as it were, is conveyed through the world and not through the plot. Which is very unusual. I can't think of another book where I've felt that way about it. Part of it is because our main character here, Case, he's very detuned. He's an amphetamine addict. He's a burnout. He's kind of fried himself to the point where he's like a 4chan guy. He's just in this sort of deep nihilism where nothing particularly matters. And I think that kind of carries over into the tone of the text, where it's very sort of unemotional and dry, and there are very extreme, horrific things that happen throughout the book that are sort of told very dispassionately and coldly, which I think I assume is meant to kind of mirror the state of mind of Case. Whereas most of the sort of moralizing and lessons that to be learned and things like that I don't like that kind of putting that box around that, but it is kind of what it is. I feel like those are conveyed more through the world of the story than the explicit plot points, which the story kind of revolves around a series of heists, I guess. Heists and recruitments and then further heists with the people who are recruited and the tools that are taken to try and achieve a goal for a entity who's mysterious and whose intentions are mysterious but are slowly revealed throughout the course of the book. I think that, like, if there is one thing that holds me back from this book being, like, a holy shit, one of my favorite things I've ever read, because this is great, but it is not that, is that aspect of it, that it feels rather cold, it feels rather removed, dispassionate, Kubrickian, I guess you could call it. That's something that I've always felt about Kubrick's films for the most part, is that they're sort of dispassionate and cold and removed. And in some movies that works better than in others, in my opinion. As the guy whose favorite Kubrick is probably Eyes Wide Shut. I really liked this book a lot, and it was really fun and fascinating to read it and see things like how the opening sort of section of the book takes place in Night City, which is the same name as the setting for Cyberpunk 2077, a video game that came out in December of 2020. If you aren't a video game player, then I'm not going to try and spend a lot of time talking about all of the things around this video game that are not the video game itself. If you do play video games, you know exactly what I mean. Let me just distill it to say that this game was very anticipated, and it was released. It was delayed repeatedly and then released in a state that I will generously call unfinished, and caused a lot of brouhaha and a lot of discourse, and most of the discourse about this game was not about how good the game was or the game itself. It was about bugs and whatever. But the point is, I bought this game the day it came out because I'm a fucking idiot, but also because it was 2020 and I had been looking forward to the game, and I knew it was going to be a buggy, hot mess because it had gotten delayed so many times. But it was like I hadn't gotten a game since Death Stranding had come out like a year and a half earlier, and I was just like, it was the pandemic, and I was like, I'm gonna buy this fucking game so I can play it because just whatever. I've been looking forward to it for a long time, and I got it and I played it, and I was like, this game is okay. It's better than it's not, right? I enjoyed more of it than I didn't. But it has a lot of problems, and it was the moment, I think, for me, when I was like, open world games need to stop. For the most part. Like, ever since Grand Theft Auto 3 had come out, nearly 20 years before this, people have been pushing into open world, and you know, there's a lot of flavors of open world. You've got your GTAs and GTA likes, you've got your Bethesda style ones, and you've got your Ubisoft style ones. The Ubisoft ones are my least favorite. I've never liked any of those games. I liked Assassin's Creed 2 enough to finish it, and I can't say that about any other Ubisoft open world game ever. I had never finished any Far Cry's, I never finished any of the other Assassin's Creeds. I just have become more and more detestful of them, and this was a game that I felt like had a lot of things in it that I liked a lot. This is more trying to be closer to a Rockstar style of game, I think, than anything else. There's a lot of things in here that I liked, but there's a lot of things in here that I didn't like. I was sort of, I feel, saved a year and a half after this when Elden Ring came out, and I was like, aha, now I can like kind of articulate what it is that I want and what it is that I don't want from an open world. Not every game needs to be an open world game. And so as I was reading Neuromancer, I couldn't stop thinking about this game, which I played 3.5 years ago. And so I dug it out from my basement, and I booted up, and I replayed it, and I played more of it this time, because the first time I played it, I was kind of like mad. It still runs on the PS4. It runs so badly, and I have a launch PS4, not a Pro, so it runs really badly. They don't even support the PS4 version of it anymore. The DLC they made, you can't run it on the PS4. It's just not allowed. Probably for the best. They shouldn't have released it for the PS4 in the first place, because it can't run it. But I didn't do everything the first time. I technically didn't do everything this time, but like I did all of the side quests, and I didn't do like everything, but I did most of everything. It would take me a bit. It was a lot of busy work if I had wanted to do everything, and I wasn't interested in doing that. And I played 35 hours of it over the course of about a week. And then, after I finished it, I thought there is a third thing that I need to address. If you watched my Paul Auster video, all the way through at the end, I said I was going to talk about Neuromancer, and that within that I was going to have a secret second review, and that within that there was going to be a secret third review. And so here we are. So after I finished playing Cyberpunk again, and then I finished reading Neuromancer, then I went back and watched the in totality 8-volume review of Cyberpunk 2077 by Tim Rogers of Action Button. I had originally shot a version of my favorite things video that was just like one video, 10 things from all different kind of artistic disciplines, and I talked about Action Button and Tim Rogers in that video, but then I ended up not using that video. But then I also didn't talk about Tim Rogers in any other video. And so here we are. I'm going to, in a very Tim Rogers way, I'm going to digress in the middle of my William Gibson review to talk about Tim Rogers briefly, because I think that Tim Rogers is a hyper-articulate person who expressed sentiments about these things that I want to paraphrase. And so I think that the best way for me to do that is through talking about him. So Tim Rogers is a video game designer and a writer and a YouTuber who in 2020 started making these extremely long video essays reviewing video games. And he's made 7 of them so far. That are at minimum 3 hours long. And the last episode of the first season was Cyberpunk, which he released as a beginning and end video that are each about an hour long, with 6 videos in the middle ranging from 30 minutes to 2 hours that you are meant to choose 2 of to watch as a sort of facsimile of the story-based choice progression of this style of video game. I watched it in this form originally last year. This time I did the 100%er version where I watched the whole 8-hour thing from beginning to end over the course of 2 days. Tim Rogers is willing to go on extremely long digressions to draw very explicit parallels between two things in a very personal way. And that's part of why I love him. I think that there is this hyper authenticity, and even when he admittedly manipulates the audience and lies to you. The thing I was originally going to talk about in the original video was the most recent video he's published, which is the first episode of the second season, which focuses on a Japanese video game which has never been translated into English. It's called Boku no Natsuyasumi, which is a life sim game about being a young boy on summer vacation in the countryside over the course of a month, which is an extremely intimate and personal exploration of the self, and an interrogation of, in a review of a piece of art, but it's more explicitly about how Tim Rogers personally relates to this game and why it's important to him, and then above that, why people relate to art and what the purpose of that is, and then above that, why people want to express, and how expression is a shared act of remembrance between a creator and an audience. I've never experienced anyone who's doing criticism that has spoken to me in this way, the way that Tim Rogers does. There have been a lot of great critics that I've read who have really shown me new ways of looking at things. John Berger, Pauline Kael, Joan Didion, people who were great minds who talked about the way that they saw and experienced things and why they liked them and why they didn't, and helped me understand why I agreed with them or why I didn't, and made me better at formulating and expressing and articulating my own opinions about things that I experience, which is extremely valuable. I think it's extremely valuable to not only immerse yourself in arts, but I think it's also important to expose yourself to criticisms of arts, at least enough that you can get to the point of good criticism, I should say, of critique, of real critique, where you can learn how to do it yourself. I think it's deeply valuable, because otherwise you're like a child with no language. You experience something that moves you, but you cannot articulate why. And that is, to me, unacceptable. The difference with Tim Rogers is his work is not only exhaustive and maximalist in a way that appeals to me as someone who's always been drawn to maximalism. His style of digressions and twisting and turning reminds me of someone like Thomas Pynchon or David Foster Wallace or any of these other postmodernists, John Barth, William Gass, who write these big, twisted, labyrinthian books. Tim Rogers not only has that aspect of it, but his writing is hyper confessional. He is interested in critiquing games in a traditional sense, where he talks about all of the functional aspects of a game. The graphics, the gameplay, the story, the pacing, the way it feels, all the things that people normally talk about with video games and with art in general. But the thing that I have always been interested in when I want to talk about and write about and interface, in a public way about art, is also, I think, the thing that he is the most interested in. Particularly, I think that he has sort of played his hand at the end in this Cyberpunk review, and then fully committed to it in the Boku no Natsu Yasumi review, which is about how the things that we love become inextricable from ourselves. And the reasons why we love them are deeply personal and autobiographical and contextual, and the most emotionally honest way to talk about something that you love is to also talk about yourself. I think that makes some people uncomfortable. I think that it also strikes a lot of people as perhaps pretentious or self-aggrandizing or something along those lines, that it's like, a Charlie Kaufman type of writing yourself into your own story. I was at Fresh Time earlier. I don't know if you have Fresh Time where you are. It's basically Whole Foods. I was at Fresh Time picking up a little dinner for myself from the deli, and I walked past two people who were talking earlier, and I just heard the guy say, Charlie Kaufman is like my favorite. And I just couldn't stop laughing to myself. I think that there is... Charlie Kaufman in adaptation is very self-aware of, he's, when he writes himself into the movie, he's saying that it's solipsistic, it's narcissistic, it's pathetic, it's strange, it's off-putting. No one experiences any piece of art in a vacuum. I was saying before about how communicating through art is sort of a shared remembrance between a creator and an audience, right? And I think that is kind of the essence of his philosophy in a lot of ways. And I think it's the essence of mine too with this channel, though I would say that him and I are in many, many ways extremely similar. We have very similar taste in a lot of ways, and a lot of similar sort of philosophies about life and existence. But then we are also extremely different in regards to things like our work ethic. And he's very meticulous, I'm very loose. He is compulsive, where I am avoidant. I am never going to... He talks about how he spends something like 600 hours, work hours minimum, working on these videos. I would never spend 10 hours working on a video, including shooting it. Even the videos I have that are 2 hours long, I think I spent 2 hours shooting it. I spent probably 3 hours editing it. The end, right? I didn't write. I never wrote. Maybe someday I will write a video and read a script for you off of some sort of prompter. It's not today. Today's not the day it's going to happen. And undoubtedly, I think that the quality of what Tim Rogers is doing is always going to be higher than the quality of what I'm doing, because I'm putting a pretty low amount of effort into it. But I think that our intentions are also very different. For me, this is very much about hobby and more of just a way to kind of like get some thoughts out of my head, articulate myself a bit, put some things out into the world, and give myself some structure, But I don't want this to be my job, and I don't want to work 60 hours a week making YouTube videos. No, thank you. Not interested. Couldn't do that even if I wanted to. It's just not in my constitution. But all of this is to kind of say, I read this book, I played this game, I watched this video, all sort of in one through line for one reason. And the reason is a search for purpose, a search for meaning, a search for inspiration, whatever. I think that there are broadly two types of people who interface with the arts in their totality. Arts and entertainment have become sort of ubiquitous, inseparable, for the most part. Film is art, film is also entertainment, right? At this point, I feel like the only arts that aren't really entertainment are like fine arts. You don't go to the museum to be entertained most of the time, 99% of the time, right? And so there are broadly two types of people who interface with entertainment, arts and entertainment. And they're the people who interface with them for artistic purposes and the people who interface with them for entertainment purposes. And like, obviously it's a spectrum, but there are most people watch movies, watch television, read books, listen to music, and they have no interest in the artistic world. They have no desire for experiencing these things on like a deeper emotional sort of philosophical level, and they have no desire to interrogate themselves and to grow through the sort of friction that comes between yourself as a viewer and a piece of art that's made by a creator, right? Or creators. I think that like traditional criticism, okay, let me break some shit down. Booktube. Let me talk about Booktube briefly. Booktube is dumb. That's the first thing I'm going to say. I have communicated with, a handful of people on Booktube, all of whom have been more successful than me, including people who got started around the same time doing book talking that I did. I will say that, like, the people who I've interacted with have been kind, and I have no interpersonal issues with anyone. I will say that almost no one is making videos about books that are worth watching. Because I think that there's not a ton of people on Booktube who are interested in having interesting conversations about art and books. Because there's basically three ways you can go about there's sort of three levels. There's three layers to talking about something. Talking about a book, talking about a movie, whatever, right? There's the expositional, which is, this is what happened. This is the plot, right? This is a summary of the book. Then there's the critical, which is like, we break down, the technical aspects of the work. We talk about the choices that the creator is making, how they work, how they don't work, how they serve the story, how they don't. This requires education, because critique is it's a skill that, and it's an art form in itself that has been honed over millennia, and you have to practice it to get better at it. And I find that almost every Booktube video about reviewing books is like 80% expositional and like 17% critical, but usually at a pretty elementary level. And then the last 3% is the third one, which I haven't said, which is the personal, the confessional, the who am I and why did this book matter to me, and how do I see myself in this book, right? To me, that's always been the core. That's the most important part. But I think you got to have all three. You got to stratify it. You got to get everything in there. Because if you don't, it's not compelling. And it's not worth your time. Now, I think that there are some people that are better than others, for sure, who are still not quite what I want. And I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to be a fucking hater. I'm not going to come out here and be like, fuck this person or fuck this person, because I don't want to get into that. And so all of this is to say, functionally, two things. This long ramble, which both have nothing to do with Neuromancer, which is a great 9 out of 10 book that if you like science fiction, it's a classic, you should read it. The two things that I'm trying to make this point of is that one, Tim Rogers has become a deeply sort of iconic person to me, in that he really exemplifies everything about leading a fulfilling life through interfacing with art that I hold precious to myself. And that, too, I want to reflect that here on this channel, in these videos where I talk about the things that I love. I'm mostly only interested in talking about things that I love. I think that if I read a book and I didn't really like it, I probably wouldn't make a video about it. For instance, I read almost all of the first book in the Eisenhorn series of Warhammer 40,000 books a couple of months ago. My buddy Saul started reading these books because our friend Dan has been, a long time Warhammer obsessee, and convinced Saul to start reading them. And then Saul was talking to me about this book he read, these Eisenhorn books. And I had been kind of in a reading slump, and they sounded like, oh, you know, they're pretty light, they're pretty easy, they're fun, they're whatever. Maybe it'll help kind of kickstart me out of this reading slump that I've been in. So I picked up this Eisenhorn omnibus that's like 4 novels and multiple short stories, and it's like 1,000 pages long or whatever. And I was like, well, I'll give this a shot, right? And I read the first one, and I started out enjoying it a lot, and then just like watched my excitement dwindle until I just couldn't even bring myself to finish the book anymore. And the reason why is that it was like junk food for my soul. It didn't nourish me in any way. It was like a book that was not well written at a sentence level. Every single character was one-dimensional and flat. Nobody grew. Nobody learned anything. Nobody changed in the whole course of the book. And every single, the main guys got plot armor up the wazoo. And then that since it's this like grim, dark horror, everybody but him is going to have something terrible happen to them and die. But the stakes for him are non-existent. Like, he will win. He will kill the bad guy. He will save the day. Like, And I was just like, I can't turn my brain off this much. I need something with more sustenance than this, right? And so I didn't finish the book, and I'm not going to make a video talking about that whole thing. I was able to just summarize the whole thing in 3 minutes. But what my point here is, this is like exactly what I wanted that to be, right? This is a book that's like, I would say that like maybe the characters don't change that much or learn that much or whatever, blah, 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 blah. William Gibson is a good writer. This book is really fun. It was just smart enough that it kept me engaged, and it was just stupid enough that I was able to just kind of have fun and burn through it. Perfect for that. But I think that, like, if something is going to really stick with me, it needs to have some sort of soul singing that harmonizes with me somewhere deep down. That's just the way it is. Speaking of, keep your eyes peeled for a reread project that I'm working on in anticipation of a new book from a favorite author of mine that's going to be published later this year. Who could it be? Who knows? Thanks for sticking around for this one. This one ended up being longer than I thought it was going to be because I rambled a lot. So, thanks for watching.